Every major victory in war is a result of long planning, long preparation, with the loss of often thousands of men. But when something comes along that is unexpected and you have this great prize, now there's a great alarm. In the other cases, you've expected it, you've planned for it, and here you come along with something that gives a great lift to the morale of the whole force, everybody. I think from private up to our bosses in Washington and London knew that the war was over. Every one of us realized that if Hitler had the slightest sense, he would immediately surrender. But it was the gallantry of the men that did it is something that should never be forgotten. And their names really ought to be in some, I'd say, permanent place in the niche of fame that the American government should like to keep.
People of Remagen loved their bridge. They loved it because it was an attraction for visitors from all over the countryside. And they loved to stroll across it on Sunday afternoons, to have picnics near the site of it. And they're right proud of the fact that the bridge was a strategic link between the German Ruhr on the north and the Saar-Moselle region on the south. Everybody knew that it would take a long amount of planning to cross the Rhine River, because this was the big natural barrier between the Siegfried Line and the straight shot toward Berlin. So even before we landed in Normandy, the Supreme Headquarters began to lay its strategic plans.
There was considerable argument as to how we should cross the Rhine when we reached the West Bank. The British argued, particularly Marshal Montgomery, that we should cross only in the north and make our attack north of the Ruhr. So that my plan was to cross the First Army just south of the Ruhr, and the Third Army under Patton to cross down somewhere near Koblenz, and then join them together and attack to sweep around the south and east side of the Ruhr and connect up with the 9th U.S. Division, which at that time was under Monty, on the east side of the Ruhr, and then clean up the Ruhr. As a matter of fact, we did do that later and secured something like 368,000 prisoners in the Ruhr.
As the Americans approached Remagen in early March, I had at my disposal, in the bridgehead of Remagen, one sapper company of 125 men. The sappers were assigned to the planking of the railroad bridge in order to make it passable for motor vehicle traffic. The men had to work day and night in order to complete the bridge.
It was very easy to defend Remagen because of the crooked and narrow streets, and particularly the 600-foot-high cliff on the opposite side of the Rhine, which provided wonderful observation for 10 miles around, from which the defender could see anybody approaching the town. By the morning of the 7th of March, along about 11:30, Carl Timmerman saw a great deal of excitement up ahead on the edge of the woods. He gunned his Jeep, went to the edge of the woods, and looked down on the broad Rhine River. And there he saw the electrifying sight of a bridge still standing, the Ludendorff Bridge, a bridge which the Americans never expected to find standing.
Around 10:20 a.m., the entire front line of the American infantry had reached the edge of the Remagen Bridgehead. Our bridge defense company opened fire with rifles and machine guns, upon which the American infantry forces retreated, and for the time being, everything remained quiet. About 11:15 a.m., a major in General Staff uniform arrived and introduced himself as Major Schurler. Major Schurler told me that he had orders to take over command at Remagen. At that moment, I breathed a sigh of relief, because I thought, now we will get the promised additional battalions. My first question was, where are the battalions? Major Schurler looked at me in surprise and asked, which battalions? Now it was my turn to look surprised, and I almost suspected that something was not quite in order.
When Timmerman first saw that the Remagen Bridge was still standing, his first reaction was, let's get some artillery down on that, because look at all those German vehicles and troops that are crossing. However, the order came back from higher headquarters, nothing except air bursts will be fired at that bridge, since it's still standing. Timmerman was then ordered by Colonel Engelmann, the task force commander, to make a reconnaissance down into Remagen, which he proceeded to do. The tanks and infantry then attacked the town. The infantry moved, hugging close to the walls of the buildings of the town, cleaned it out within 2 hours.
While the troops were moving into position for the attack on the bridge, we captured a number of soldiers, civilians, and some railroad people in uniform. The rumor came back to me that several of these reported that the bridge was to be blown up at 4 o'clock. I don't think there was any truth in that, but at the time, I informed the task force commander, Colonel Engelmann, that he should speed up his attack, since the bridge was supposed to be blown at 4 o'clock. It was then about 3:30.
Major Devers, the infantry battalion commander, asked Lieutenant Timmerman, do you think you could get your company across that bridge? Timmerman said, well, we can try. Devers said, go ahead. Timmerman asked, what if the bridge blows up in my face? The battalion commander didn't answer. He just walked away. In fact, nobody ever answered the question, what if the bridge blows up in my face?
A powerful detonation occurred on the left bank of the Rhine, immediately behind the bridge. I did not know how to explain this. Captain Friesenhahn, the bridge commander, had blasted dike on the other side of the bridge, at the ramp of the bridge, a demolition which had already been envisaged. This was a sign to me that the Americans were approaching.
When the truck came up on the morning of the 7th of March, Brodke and Friesenhahn were horrified to discover that they had gotten just about half as much explosives as they had been promised, and in addition to that, it was an industrial type of explosive known as Donnerit instead of the military explosive, which was far more powerful.
Captain Friesenhahn was calling from the tunnel entrance. Captain Brodke, combat commander! I rushed over to him. Still completely out of breath, he reports to me, the Americans, they're the Bishop Timbermen. This mill was located immediately behind the Rhine. In other words, they had reached the bridge. I told him, Friesenhahn, blast the bridge, blow it up. I have no permission. Major Schurler is the only one who can give the order for demolition. At that moment, Major Schurler was on the other side of the tunnel, 350 meters away from us, only to be reached on foot. So I dashed off through the dark tunnel to Major Schurler. I reported to him, the Americans are going to cross the bridge. Major Schurler is very calm. I said, Major, if you don't give orders to blast the bridge, I will do so. Then go ahead, have the bridge blasted. I ran back to Captain Friesenhahn. Back again through the dark tunnel. Again, minutes passed before I could reach him. As soon as he could hear me, I called out to him, Friesenhahn, blow up the bridge! Friesenhahn shouts, full cover, full cover! Everybody in the tunnel lies down flat on the ground in order to escape the tremendous blast we expected.
As far as we know, we actually saw the bridge lift up off its foundation. There was dust and debris thrown all over, and after a while, you couldn't see the bridge anymore. Too long, the dust cleared, the bridge was still standing. And Timmerman said, okay, move out.
Instinctively, my hand comes to my neck. I know. If the bridge doesn't go down into the water, my life will be at stake. Something has to happen. I rush back to Major Schurler and report to him. Demolition of the bridge has failed. But I had hardly reached him when someone called again through the tunnel, Captain Bradke, combat commander up front. It grows louder and louder. Major Schurler says, have a look what is going on. Again, I run back through the tunnel, through the masses of civilians, passing men, women, children. Soldiers are amongst them. I reach Friesenhahn. Friesenhahn already shouts, Americans across the bridge. That was all we needed. Come on, Friesenhahn. A few men from the sapper units. Counterattack. There can't be many of them. We have to throw them back. I've already tried it. We wanted to get out immediately. But look, the tremendous gunfire aimed at the entrance of the tunnel. One grenade after another. You can't subject anybody to that. No one will get out alive. Friesenhahn, there is only one possibility. Escape to the other end of the tunnel, across the dam, a counterattack. The Americans have to retreat. I rush back to Major Schurler. Report to him. Americans are crossing the bridge. Major, you have to prepare for an immediate counterattack. I will get the people out of the tunnel. Do you want to get them out? No, Bradke. You go ahead. I enter the tunnel. Get hold of a sergeant. Summon everyone who still carries arms. Here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 men. Sergeant Follner. Go on, get me 9 men. Major Schurler still has 2 lieutenants with him. He should put them into action.
This bridge enabled us to get across the Rhine here without having to make an assault later on. And really made a decision to cross on a wide front easier for Eisenhower to make.
Our position on the west bank of the Rhine, we could see considerable enemy activity across the river in the little town of Erpel. A very pretty little town, but it was set on the side of a mountain or a cliff. It did not lend itself very well to an attack. If we should move into that area, the enemy would have quite an advantage overlooking our position. However, since we were there to cover the crossing of the infantry, we did pick out numerous targets of opportunity, as we call them, and opened fire and fired across the river to assist the infantry in crossing the bridge.
As we started across, the only thing that was in my mind was to get off that bridge. The Germans had attempted once to blow it and had failed. And we felt sure, or I felt sure, that the next time the bridge would go. Therefore, we tried to move as fast as we possibly could. However, the leading elements were being shot at by snipers and other people on the other side, and they were moving more cautiously. Right in front of us, as you get off the bridge, there's a tunnel, the railroad tunnel. Sergeant Krebs and I advanced towards it, and then we each took a hand grenade and threw it into the tunnel. There was a curve in the tunnel, and we got down as far as the curve, and we heard a great many voices talking and yelling and everything else. We couldn't make out how many people or who they were. We didn't know whether it was German soldiers or whether they were German civilians. However, we couldn't take a chance, so we threw a couple more grenades and fired a couple more shots.
Captain Friesenhahn and I rushed to the tunnel exit, quickly grab a few samples, and try for the second time to make an escape from the tunnel. And again the hand grenades roared down from the tunnel. And at a distance of approximately 120 meters in front of us, a machine gun fires right into the tunnel. Suddenly there are screams coming from behind us. We turn around and go back. There are casualties among the civilians. A man, a child. A bullet wound in the stomach, a gunshot in the leg. The civilians are excited. They scream. They cling to the soldiers, grab them and take away their arms. They come to me. Combat commander, order a ceasefire, stop it. Our women, our children. I too have a wife at home. What shall I do? An order is an order. This is the most difficult hour of my life. I decide to summon the officers. I cannot carry on. I tell them, according to the Führer's orders, if an officer is no longer in a position to continue combat, he will have to pass on command. And whoever takes over will continue combat. And every officer has to take orders from him, down to the lowest rank soldier. Gentlemen, I have an announcement. Which one of you is willing to carry on the battle? I see silence. No one volunteers. Gentlemen, in that case, I'm obliged to pass on the command to the unit. Then I happen to look toward the tunnel exit. Civilians have hoisted the white flag, and they're leaving the tunnel together with the soldiers. It's impossible to go on fighting now. Gentlemen, the white flag has been hoisted without our consent. We are still subject to the regulations of the Geneva Convention. If we continue to fight, we will give the enemy the right to demolish everything. And all these women and children, we will be morally responsible for them. I therefore order a ceasefire. Destroy your weapons, and we will be the last ones to leave the tunnel. Meanwhile, the majority of civilians has left the tunnel, together with the soldiers. We 5 officers who are still in the tunnel, we are now leaving the tunnel too. The last ones to go are Captain Friesenhahn and I. We became prisoners of war of the Americans.
During the afternoon, we spent considerable time in adjusting our guns and making notes where various targets were, so in the event that we had to fire during the night, we would have those targets zeroed in. However, when nighttime came, I was called into a meeting of the officers by our combat commander to be briefed on what our next action would be. I was told at that time that we were going to attempt a crossing of the bridge with our tanks. It was not known if the strength of the bridge was sufficient to hold a tank, but the infantry needed armored support on the other side, and we had to make an effort to get our tanks over there. So we all started across, one close behind the other. As a matter of fact, I was so close to the tank in front of me that several times before the crossing was over, I had bumped Speedy Goodson's tank. I had called ahead to him because it was so dark, asking him to make sure that he did not get too far away from me. And he says, "Lieutenant, I can't very well get far away from you with you bumping me constantly." Except for the indecision or inability to follow this tape across the bridge, we did get across without any incident.
The Americans got 5 tanks and about 120 infantrymen across the Remagen Bridge, a pretty thin force to hold a strategic point like that. But the next morning, all of the American troops within miles around converged on the bridgehead, and within 24 hours, 8,000 American soldiers had crossed the Remagen Bridge.
We established a CP just across from the bridge on the east side, just north of the bridge, about 200 yards. This CP was in what had been the burgomaster's house at Erpel. It was from this command post in the cellar of the burgomaster's house at Erpel that we commanded the development of the initial bridgehead across the Rhine River. Beginning that morning and continuing for a number of days later, there was a constant stream of American troops from the west bank to the east bank of the river.
As soon as we could, we threw 4 divisions across on the east side of the Rhine to form a bridgehead. The Germans countered by throwing 11 German divisions against us to try to push us back or at least contain us. Fortunately for us, those were divisions that had been fighting in the Bulge and the Ardennes and were very much reduced in strength and effectiveness. One of the divisions, for example, they threw against us was the 2nd Panzer Division, which had been badly chewed up and suffered terrific casualties. Another was the 5th Airborne German Division, which had also suffered terrific casualties. So even with 11 divisions thrown against our 4, they were not able to drive us back across the river. In fact, we could expand almost at will against them, and we gave orders to the 1st Division, to the 1st Army, to have those divisions expand, advance about 1,000 yards a day so that they would not be mined in and therefore would be able to break out when the time came.
Hitler threw in everything he had in an effort to destroy the Remagen Bridge. He fired the deadly V2s against the bridge. He mobilized a couple of big 17-centimeter railroad guns to fire in their big charges. Most of all, he thought he could destroy the bridge through underwater swimmers. There was a special group of swimmers that had been trained in Vienna, all under 29 years of age, in perfect physical condition. They went into the water several miles above the bridge and swam underneath water, armed with charges that they were going to put against the bridge. However, they were picked up by real powerful American searchlights mounted on tanks that were sweeping the river during the night. These swimmers never did reach their objective, and they were captured by the Americans a mile or so below the bridge.
With reference to the traffic across the bridge, As you can well understand, there was only the one bridge to start with. Engineers were brought forward immediately and started the construction of ferries and then bridges across the river. Initially, almost all of the traffic was from west to east. The only time we reversed the traffic was to take back the wounded. Later, when ferries were in operation and the pontoon bridges came into use, the traffic was both ways and the bridge was closed for repairs.
For a period of about 7 days, my unit, the Combat Engineer Battalion, worked hand in hand with a bridge construction outfit that was more or less in charge of erecting the dismembered pieces of iron and steel that were the upper part of the bridge. Ours was mainly the job of the flooring of the bridge. This was a railroad bridge, by the way. And we worked feverishly around the clock, 24 hours a day in different shifts to build a Bailey Bridge, to get treadway on the bridge so that we could give the boys some support or get some equipment to them that were fighting so hard on the other side of the river. During this time, there was constantly periods where enemy aircraft was coming in, strafing the bridge, dropping bombs, trying to knock this bridge out. There was artillery fire. We stopped periodically to get under cover for these. One time I remember, rather stupid of me, enemy aircraft came over, and as it did, I tried to find something to hide under, and it was the Bailey Bridge that we were constructing. And after the strafing was over, I realized that this is probably the worst place that I could have been, because if that bridge had been hit, I'd have been caught or trapped underneath there. But these are the things that you remember afterwards, at any rate. This was a constant turmoil. It was men racing against time, that we needed help for those fellows over there, and we were working real hard, equipment flying all over the place. Lieutenant Enos and I were down at the bridgehead, or at the western bank, and we were discussing a few little details, and he was pulling some of his men off, and I was just getting ready to send mine up, when suddenly we heard something like rifle fire, and we looked up in the air as if to look for aircraft, but instead there was dust coming up, rising from the bridge, and it seemed to totter a little, and it seemed to sway toward us, and then the center section of the bridge started to cave in. We had trucks up on the bridge that part of it was on the center section and part on the abutment side, so that this truck, I can remember, just folded up like an envelope. Pieces of equipment and pieces of the bridge were tumbling down, and I think our first reaction was to take cover that either the bridge had been hit or for some reason that it was going to fall. And then just as rapidly as you can well imagine, that whole big structure disappeared in front of us. And now we're all running to see what we can do about fishing people out of the river. That it was almost a bubbling, roaring noise, that it almost seemed like the river itself had been turned into a boiling pot with all this debris falling in it, and men screaming, and you could see fellows were hurt and grasping for something to hang on to and going down the river, where eventually they were picked up. But ours was a case of real turmoil then.
Lots of reasons contributed to the collapse of the Ludendorff Bridge on the 17th of March. In the first place, the German demolition on the 7th of March had really shattered one side of the bridge and weakened it seriously. Then when the Americans put planking on the bridge to cover it over and cover over the holes which had been blown in the bridge, this added about 50 tons of weight to the bridge. There was a great deal of heavy pounding from the tanks and the vehicles that crossed. The German artillery shells tore a lot of additional holes in the bridge. Then there were the bombs that the Luftwaffe dropped on the bridge itself. One of the real reasons, I think, in addition to this, that contributed to the collapse was the amount of heavy equipment that the engineers moved onto the bridge. Cranes, electric arc welders, air compressors, all these things set up vibrations. The American artillery batteries, and particularly anti-aircraft batteries, that set up vibrations that caused all the ground to shake around the bridge. I don't think that you could say that any single one of these factors caused the collapse of the bridge, but the combination of them caused the structure just to weaken and die on the 17th of March.
So much has been said and written about Remagen. It was said that the bridge fell into the hands of the Americans through treason, sabotage, and cowardice. I guarantee that what I told you is true. Neither sabotage nor treason was involved. The bridge was lost to the Americans. The officers tried, and the German soldiers tried, up to the very last moment, to do their duty.
Captain Carl Friesenhahn, when I interviewed him right after the war, asked what awards the first Americans had received for crossing the bridge. And when I told him they had received Distinguished Service Crosses, he responded, they deserved them and then some. They saw us trying to blow up that bridge, and by all odds, it should have been blown up while they were crossing it. In my mind, they were the greatest heroes in the whole war.